Plus.
Well, he was a figure from the world of sport, but he transcended sport, became a big showbiz figure, much loved figure, in fact, particularly from the 70s onwards through the 80s and 90s. I had the pleasure and privilege of meeting him a couple of times, only on telly gigs, on charity gigs, and he was always absolutely charming and very funny, but he did have his own problems in his own life, including, and he was very frank about this, problems with gambling addiction. He has now died. His name, of course, is Willie Thorne. A number of obituaries in the papers to him this morning. He's died at the age of just 66. On the way, our snooker expert, Marcus Stead. But first, let's take stock of Willie Thorne, the man and the snooker legend.
You meet people in your life, you know, that just light up the room when they come in, and Willie was one of those people. And the fact that we were born on the same birthday, the 4th of March, we always had that affinity. You know, I've known him since he was, 14? And, yeah, it's just terrible. And the fact that you won't be in his company again, you won't see him again, it's a real blow.
Former snooker player Willie Thorne has died at the age of 66. The news has been confirmed on a GoFundMe page set up after he announced he was battling leukemia in March. He was taken to hospital in Spain after suffering respiratory failure last week.
If you went out for dinner with him, if you walked in a room, you knew you were going to have a good night. And there's not many people you can say that about consistently, and that's what Willie did. You know, he just shone a light on everywhere that he went because he was a character and he was great company.
I met him on a good few occasions. Very witty, very funny man, good company. Nobody, I didn't hear Andy ever have a bad word about Willie. He was just a tremendous character and a great man.
It's absolutely devastating, you know. He was a fantastic snooker player. I met him when I was 13 years of age. He come to watch me and Tony Mio practice. I've known him for 45 years. He was a great guy and will be missed by every snooker player and everybody with anything to do with snooker. Everybody's absolutely devastated.
But now on TalkSport Extra Time, some very sad news indeed. As I'm sure you all know by now, the former snooker star and BBC commentator Willie Thorne has died. Lovely individual. Only met him a couple of times, but he was charming, he was warm, he was funny, and he sadly died at the age of just 66. To tell us more about the man and the legend and the legacy, let's talk again to Marcus Stead, writer of a snooker scene, of course, and our regular snooker and darts correspondent. And normally we are talking, Marcus, about far happier topics. A sad loss, this, and way too young, Willie Thorne. Good morning, Marcus.
Good morning, Paul. Yes, you are correct. First of all, I'd like to offer my condolences to Willie's family and friends. The news was not unexpected. He'd been ill for some time. I think he was diagnosed with leukemia in March. We've been hearing in the last week or two that he was very unwell indeed. And there's been an outpouring of tributes throughout Wednesday, which reflects his popularity within the game. And Willie Thorne leaves a very strong legacy inside snooker. He was born in 1954. And as a boy, he played a number of sports, but he excelled at snooker. He left school at the age of just 15, and he used to bunk off school. He used to take the school bus every morning, and some mornings he wouldn't get off the bus after school. He'd go on to the next stop, which is where the snooker hall was, where he practiced, and then he'd only turn up at school in the afternoons. That was one of his traits. But he left school at the age of 15. He took a job as an estimator for a glass factory in Loughborough, and he practiced in snooker halls in Loughborough and in Leicester. He won the English Under-16 title in 1970. And one of Willie's first TV appearances came in 1974 on the Indoor League with Fred Truman. You know, the
kind of pub sports show, basically, a great old show.
That was it. I know you play the theme tune coming out of ad breaks on this programme sometimes, don't you?
That's certainly right. Do.
And the Fred Truman catchphrase, "I'll City," he used to say.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar with it, the Indoor League was a 1970s programme made by Yorkshire Television, shown across the ITV network. It showcased indoor sports and pub sports such as darts, shove-eight-knee, arm wrestling, table football, and lots more besides, long before my time, but I'm a fan. And the late darts commentator Sid Waddell was actually the producer of the early series of the Indoor League. Well, in 1974, Willie appeared on the Indoor League and played in the American Pool Tournament, where he beat Ray Edmonds in the final. Now, Ray is also a distinguished snooker player. He's a former world amateur champion. He went on to become a commentator for both the BBC and ITV. Ray's now enjoying his retirement in Spain. He's over the age of 80 now. The following year, 1975, Willie reached the final again on Indoor League of the American Pool Tournament. But Ray, he'd finished, as I say, runner-up for 2 years in a row. He beat Willie on that occasion. And then Willie turned professional in snooker in 1975, that same year. And it was clear then he had a considerable talent, but that was never really matched in terms of trophies he won. However, he did win the Mercantile Credit Classic in 1985, where he beat Cliff Thorburn 13-8 in the final. And one of the most famous moments of his career came later that year at the UK Championship. This was the era, Paul, when Steve Davis was in his absolute pomp.
Yep.
And Willie Thorne reached the final where he faced Steve Davis. First to 16 frames wins. Willie is leading Steve Davis 13-8, and he's on course for victory. Then, in the first frame of the final session in that evening, Willie missed a straightforward blue off its spot. Steve Davis took the frame. Willie won only one more frame all night, and Davis went on to win 16-14. And Willie reached the quarterfinals at the Crucible World Championship, the Crucible, twice in 1982 and 1986. The latter, he beat 1986. He beat a young debutant, Stephen Hendry, in the first round, 10-8. Right. And Hendry would go on to beat Thorne 10-7 in the first round the following year. Other achievements in Willie's career: he won the Hong Kong Masters in September 1986, where he beat Steve Davis 5-2 in the semi-finals and Dennis Taylor 8-3 in the final. The only other professional trophy he won was the Matchroom Professional Championship, which also took place in September 1986. It was only open to players managed by Barry Hearn's Matchroom stable, and Willie beat Steve Davis 10-9 in the final of that in a theatre in Southend-on-Sea. And Willie was a regular presence in TV tournaments well into the 1990s.
And also, I mean, even turned up, didn't he, on Top of the Pops with Chaz and Dave in 86, I think, with Snooker Loopy.
That's right, Paul. Yeah, that was one of the highlights. He had a whole verse dedicated to him in that. Chaz and Dave, a very, very funny song, that. But as late as 1993 at the Scottish Masters, he beat Stephen Hendry 6-3 in the quarterfinals before losing 6-3 to the eventual champion Ken Doherty in the next round. But I'm afraid, Paul, his gambling habit took hold from the age of 16, and even in his 1980s pomp, that was always something that was there in the background.
I mean, he had his challenges in his life as well, but he's also had admirers. We had Ronnie O'Sullivan on the Sports Bar earlier paying tribute to him. I know he was a big friend, because he was a Leicester lad, he was a big friend, a personal friend of Gary Lineker, who's played tribute. And him and Dennis Taylor were almost a double act at times, weren't they, together? Great together.
They were all part of the Matchroom mob, as they were in the 1980s. There was Steve Davis, obviously his working relationship and friendship with Barry Hearn goes back far further, going back to the Romford days. But they're part of the Matchroom stable was Steve Davis, Dennis Taylor, Willie Thorne, Terry Griffiths, Tony Meo and Jimmy White. But this issue of gambling, well, Willie was first declared bankrupt in 1992. Sadly, he never managed to kick his gambling habit, and Willie was an integral part of the Sky Sports snooker team in the 1990s when Sky Sports was new. And Jeff Stelling, the presenter of the snooker coverage in those days, of course best known for Soccer Saturday nowadays, said that he and Willie often used to sneak off to betting shops during quieter periods and when there wasn't much going on, and Jeff would have a flutter on the horses, but Willie would have a more extreme bet. But as Jeff has said a number of times in interviews, and even in one of Jeff's books, Willie was a terrible gambler. He very rarely won a bet. And Barry Hearn, who managed Willie for a period in the 1980s, as I just said, he said that he never ever saw Willie Thorne win a bet. And Willie admitted years ago that he bet up to £20,000 on a race. And this is incredible stuff. But things really became a problem at the 1996 Scottish Masters. And Willie was there as a commentator for Sky, and he was heavily in debt at the time. The televised match this particular day was Ken Doherty against John Parrott. A small number of people knew that John's cue had been lost, and he would be playing with an unfamiliar cue on that day. Willie, who I say was in a lot of debt, he bet £38,000 on Ken Doherty winning.
Goodness.
And if Ken had won, Willie would have picked up £35,000 in profit. Parrott had a slow start, but went on to win the match 6-3. So Willie had done his money, 38 grand on top of his already astonishing debts. But so John won that match, and to make matters worse, Willie was in the commentary box for the match, so he had to watch on and commentate while knowing this was all going on. So Willie was lucky not to be declared bankrupt again in 2002 when he owed the Inland Revenue £250,000. A testimonial was arranged for him. The Inland Revenue was placated with an interim payment, but he was never out of the woods financially. And then in 2013, things got really bad for Willie. His mother, Nancy, died. He ended up attempting suicide twice. He talked about it on an interview.
Dreadful.
It was. He talked about it in an interview on This Morning with Philip Schofield and Amanda Holden in 2013. And in the summer of 2013, he was declared bankrupt again, this time for more than £976,000. And in Snooker Scene, we listed his creditors at the time. And I dug out that article this evening, and this is really eye-watering stuff. It's terrible, really. Somebody known as Doug, only credited as Doug, was owed £250,000. Emma Jane Brown was owed £80,000. Gary Purkis, best known as the manager of Stuart Bingham, was owed £76,000. Barry Hearn himself was owed £25,000. And my late friend Mike Watterson, the snooker promoter, was owed £6,500. And I know from the conversations I had with Mike that he was very hurt by that. We used to talk about it at length because he and Willie had been friends for more than 40 years. And Mike ended up going to the Daily Mirror with that story. And
it underlines, I suppose, that what a terrible affliction gambling addiction is. I mean, that's why people say, be gamble aware, when the fun stops, stop. And there is help available, but it just shows it can cast a huge shadow, even somebody as full of life of Willie Thorne over his life.
It was, Paul, and this was what I'm getting at here is this really affected his friendships and his personal relationships. Yeah. It's like my colleague Phil Yates. This is in the bankruptcy petition. He commentated with Willie for Sky throughout the 1990s, well into the 2000s, and even into the 2010s. I think he lent Willie £6,000 after Willie's mother Nancy died. And again, he never saw it again. And a lot of names were not on that petition, not on the official list. Like Nigel Troth, the Chesterfield bookmaker, was owed more than £350,000 by Willie Thorne. And it's sometime in mid to late 2017, Willie asked Nigel for another loan, and Nigel loaned him another £1,500 on condition that Willie did not contact him again. Now, here's the thing, Paul. Willie was a very pleasant man to meet, as you said in your introduction. Yeah. He was easy to chat show. He got good on chat shows. He talked to fans. He'd give autographs. Very easy to get on with on a personal level. But if he asked you for money, I'm afraid you'd just never see it again. And to give you an idea of how bad things were, normally you're discharged from bankruptcy after a year and the slate is wiped clean. But in 2015, he was given a bankruptcy restriction order, which was to last until 2022. Now, that's a very long time. And in May last year, he got into trouble again after breaching that order by borrowing £18,000. So what I would say, Paul, is this is a particularly tragic story. And I'd say to people listening now, if you know you've got a gambling problem and you know in your heart you have got issues, for crying out loud, get help with it before you get to anything like this stage.
And let's end on a more positive note, though, about the man himself. I mean, he was also known as Mr. Maximum. He was, in his day, an amazing player. And as we both stressed, he was hugely loved by the public, a real funny guy and a lovely guy.
He was, Paul. He was great fun on television. If he appeared on Big Break, he was good-humoured. He appeared on Strictly Come Dancing a few years ago. I think he finished 16th out of 18th. He also he was also part of a documentary about 3 or 4 years ago where it was a fly-on-the-wall documentary where they get a celebrity to pair up with a homeless person and have to spend a night on the streets. And Willie was struggling to spend a night on the streets, so he, in the end, and the camera crew followed him around, he paid for himself and the guy he was paired with, the homeless man. He paid for him to have a night in a hotel, but it was a way of showing ordinary people in the ordinary public how tough life is for the homeless, particularly in winter. And Willie did his bit there. There's also all sorts of fun things Willie Thorne was involved in. I don't want to say his whole life was doom and gloom. It certainly wasn't. He was involved in something called Big Willie Underpants.
Steady.
That is real. That actually happened. And of course, other things. The Peter Kay comic relief version of I Would Roll 500 Miles with the Proclaimers. He and Dennis Taylor were in the video of that.
Of
he and Dennis teamed up again. Here we go, Paul. I bet you haven't heard of this one. The Denise Welch version of You Don't Have to Say You Love Me in the 1990s.
I have not heard. That's on my list now to try and track down. Wow.
It was in the 90s when Soldier was popular and Denise was in that. The video of it, which you remember a few weeks ago, we talked about Peter Ebdon voted the worst snooker video of the year on the chart show. Some point in the 90s. Well, and Denise's video, sadly, was also voted the worst video of the year on the chart show. But Willie Thorne and Dennis Taylor are actually in that video. And I couldn't find the
game for a laugh.
But Willie Thorne, he wasn't afraid to have a laugh at his own expense. And even in the famous Chaz and Dave song, he talks about his lack of hair in that. That's the Chaz and Dave line. So a great character. He'd be hugely missed, Paul.
A wonderful tribute there, Marcus, and also some sobering words there. Marcus Stead, our snooker expert, really been snooker scene. We're discussing the very sad news, indeed, that legendary snooker player, Willie Thorne, has, as we all know now, died at the age of just 66. And you heard that conversation right here on TalkSport Extra Time.
When you need all the latest form and odds on all the sporting action and you need it fast, you